The city was silent, broken under the weight of war. Smoke curled in the sky like the breath of a dying giant, and rubble stretched out in every direction. Among the fallen stone and bent metal, a lone human soldier walked carefully, each step heavy with exhaustion. His uniform was torn, his arm bleeding from a deep cut, but he pushed forward. The silence made him uneasy. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of something waiting. His boots crunched against shattered glass, and he stopped when he heard another sound. A voice, weak and strained, carried through the ruins. He turned quickly, his hand tightening on the hilt of his weapon. But what he saw was not an enemy soldier in full strength. From the broken shadow of a collapsed tower, an alien figure staggered forward. She was tall, graceful even in her pain, though her steps wavered like she might collapse at any moment. Her armor, once polished and shining, was split down the side, burned black in places, and her face bore scratches that did not suit her noble appearance. Her eyes, sharp and glowing with faint energy, locked on him with hatred. She stopped only a few feet away, swaying on her legs, and spat out the words in a voice filled with venom. "Don't you dare touch me, human." The soldier froze. He had expected her to attack, but instead she stood there trembling with fury and pride. He saw the wound along her side, dark blood seeping slowly. She was no threat in this state, yet her spirit burned brighter than her broken body. For a moment he almost respected her stubbornness. But war had taught him to be careful, to never underestimate anyone. He slowly lowered his weapon, though his hand did not leave it. "I wasn't going to," he answered calmly. His voice was hoarse, worn out from shouting and smoke. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be standing there." Her eyes narrowed at him, filled with fire. She wanted to believe he was lying, wanted to keep her hatred strong, but the truth was visible. She could feel her body failing. The noble woman had been betrayed, left behind when she should have been protected. Now she was standing in front of the very creature she had been raised to despise. A human, the enemy of her people. The soldier studied her quietly. He saw not just an alien, not just a noble, but a being caught between pride and weakness. His training screamed at him to move on, to leave her behind. Yet his humanity whispered another thought. He reached into his pack, pulled out a half-empty flask of water and tossed it lightly toward her feet. She stared at it, her jaw tightening. "You think I will drink from the hands of a human?" Her voice shook, though not from strength, but from the weariness gnawing at her bones. "Drink or don't," he replied simply. "Makes no difference to me." He turned his back slightly, sitting down on a fallen piece of stone. His body screamed for rest, but his eyes stayed sharp, watching the shadows. The noble woman glared at him, refusing to bend to his kindness. But her throat was dry and her hands trembled. Pride was strong, yet survival was stronger. She knelt slowly, picked up the flask, and after a long hesitation took a sip. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it eased the burning in her throat. She hated herself for needing it, hated him more for offering it. As night began to fall, the ruined city grew darker, the silence breaking with distant howls. Predators had already begun moving into the wreckage, drawn by the smell of blood and death. She stiffened, her hand going to her weapon, but it was damaged, barely functional. The human soldier stood, scanning the distance with alert eyes. He could hear the low growl of creatures circling, waiting for weakness. "You should stay close to the fire when I make it," he said. His tone was even, not offering, not demanding. "Unless you want to be eaten before dawn," her pride flared instantly. "I need no protection from you." "Then don't take it," he replied, gathering bits of broken wood and sparks from his gear. "But if you scream when they come for you, I'm not running to save you." The noble woman's lips tightened. She hated the way his words pressed against her pride, hated more the truth inside them. Her legs trembled as she shifted, finally lowering herself a short distance from him. Not beside him, not close enough to suggest trust, but near enough that the fire's warmth touched her skin. The flames flickered to life, throwing orange light across the broken stones. Shadows danced on her face, showing the exhaustion behind her fierce eyes. She did not speak, but her silence was not victory. It was survival. The human soldier leaned back against the ruined wall, his weapon across his knees. He watched her, for a long moment before turning his gaze to the fire. He knew tomorrow might bring more danger. Enemy patrols, collapsing structures, hunger, or betrayal. But tonight, in this fragile moment, an unspoken truce had begun. She kept her arms crossed, her chin high and her voice locked in silence, but deep inside she was unsettled. The human was not what she expected. He did not gloat, did not threaten, did not use her weakness against her. He simply sat there, tired yet calm, treating her not as a trophy or an enemy, but as another soul, lost in the wreckage of war. She hated him for that, and perhaps feared him more for it. The fire burned low, its glow flickering against the broken stones. The human soldier sat with his back to the wall, pretending to rest, though his eyes stayed sharp. The alien noblewoman sat a little distance away, her posture stiff, her arms wrapped tightly across her chest as if that could shield her from both the cold night and the human's presence. She hated the thought of needing his fire, hated that she had already tasted his water. Pride was a heavy chain, but weakness pressed harder on her body. The night was alive with sounds. Distant roars echoed from the wild edges of the city. Strange, creatures moving through the ruins, sniffing out blood. The human poked the fire with a bit of scrap metal, sending sparks up into the darkness. He didn't speak. She wanted to believe it was because he had no words, but the truth was he was letting her choose if silence or speech would rule between them. That unsettled her. Humans were supposed to be loud, impulsive, foolish. Yet this one sat calm, watching, waiting. When dawn broke, the air carried the heavy smell of smoke and dust. The human rose first, rolling his stiff shoulders, his eyes scanning the horizon. He glanced at her once, and she turned her face away quickly, not wanting him to think she cared about his movements. Still, when he started walking, she forced her legs to follow. She stumbled, nearly falling, but caught herself before he could offer a hand. She refused to give him that victory. The city stretched endlessly, broken buildings leaning against each other like tired giants. Everywhere there were scars of battle, walls melted by weapons, streets cracked open, the blackened remains of machines abandoned in silence. They walked side by side, though never close. Every step was a test of her will. She hated her body for slowing her, hated him for noticing when she faltered. "Your people built this place?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, without mockery. She shot him a sharp look. "My people built civilizations before your species learned to sharpen stone." He smirked faintly. "And yet, here you are walking through ruins like the rest of us." Her pride burned hot, but she had no reply. The ruins answered for her. Hours passed, the sun rising higher. Her body grew weaker with each step, the wound on her side burning like fire. She tried to hide it, but her movements betrayed her. He noticed, of course, he always noticed. He slowed his pace slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough that she could keep walking without falling behind. She wanted to scream at him, to accuse him of pity, but she had no strength to waste on words. By midday, the heat grew unbearable. The human finally stopped near a collapsed structure that still cast a thin strip of shade. He dropped his pack to the ground, leaning against the stone. She stood stubbornly for a moment, unwilling to rest simply because he chose to, but her legs shook beneath her. Finally, with silent anger, she lowered herself to the ground opposite him. He pulled out a ration pack, tore it open, and ate slowly. He didn't offer her any. She was both relieved and insulted. Relieved because she would have refused, insulted because he didn't bother. Still, when her stomach growled quietly, she clenched her jaw, praying he hadn't heard. His eyes flicked toward her once, then returned to his food. He said nothing. That silence felt heavier than any insult. When they set off again, the city seemed to grow more dangerous. They passed through narrow alleys filled with shadows, each one hiding the sound of movement. At one point, the growl of a scavenger beast echoed behind them. She froze, her weapon useless in its broken state. The human raised his rifle slowly, scanning the ruins until the sound faded. She didn't thank him. She never would. But her hands stopped trembling after that moment. As the afternoon stretched on, she finally spoke, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the road ahead. At last he said, "Because leaving you here would make me no better than the ones who betrayed you." Her eyes widened, anger rising in her chest. "You know nothing of my people." "Maybe," he admitted. "But betrayal looks the same on every face." She wanted to argue, to cut him down with words, but his answer struck too close to truth. Her silence afterward was not victory, but retreat. As evening approached, their uneasy march brought them to the edge of what had once been a grand square. Statues lay broken across the stones, and shattered banners fluttered weakly in the wind. The noblewoman stopped suddenly, her eyes lingering on one ruined statue. It had been a monument to her ancestors, her bloodline, a proud symbol of power. Now it lay face down in the dust. Her throat tightened, but she forced her expression back into stone before he could notice her pain. The human studied her in silence, reading her grief in the way her shoulders tensed. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her. That strangely made it easier to breathe. When night came again, they built another fire, though smaller than the last. She sat in silence, staring into the flames, her mind turning over the day. The human lay nearby, his head tilted back against the wall, his rifle within reach. He looked exhausted, but there was a steadiness in him, a calm that unsettled her more than any weapon. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Don't think this means I trust you." His eyes opened slightly, catching the firelight. "I wouldn't dream of it." For a moment the flames cracked between them, filling the silence. She turned her face away, refusing to let him see that her words had been weaker than she intended. Somewhere in the ruins, the howls rose again. The night would not be kind, but neither of them moved apart. The night stretched long and heavy, filled with distant cries and the crackle of fire. The human soldier slept lightly, his rifle across his lap, while the alien noblewoman sat with her eyes fixed on the flames. She told herself she was only staying awake because she did not trust him, but in truth, her body refused to rest. Her mind swirled with thoughts she did not want. She had been raised to believe humans were brutish, untrustworthy creatures. Yet this one, calm and steady in the shadows, unsettled that belief. He had not mocked her weakness. He had not struck her when she was vulnerable. He had simply shared his fire, and that was more dangerous than any weapon. When morning broke, the city was cloaked in a gray haze. They set out again, the soldier leading the way, his steps sure even in the ruins. She followed, still limping, though she tried to hide the pain in her side. He did not comment, but she could feel him adjusting, his pace to match hers. That small act of care burned her pride like a hot brand. She hated being slowed down, hated needing him, yet she could not deny that without him she would have fallen already. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the narrow streets opened into what had once been a marketplace. Stalls lay broken, their wares turned to ash. Signs of past life lingered. Scraps of cloth, shattered ceramics, the faint scent of something burned long ago. She stopped for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning the wreckage. In her mind, she saw the place as it had been, crowded with her people, filled with voices and light. Now it was nothing but echoes. The human watched her pause. "This was your city," he said softly. She stiffened. "It still is." Her voice carried more anger than conviction. He nodded, saying nothing more. His silence felt sharper than words. As they passed the marketplace, they heard the sound of crumbling stone. Both froze instantly. Out of the shadows slinked a creature, long and low, its skin dark and rippling like liquid. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its teeth flashed as it hissed. The noblewoman tensed, reaching instinctively for her broken weapon, but the human had already raised his rifle. The creature darted forward with unnatural speed, claws scraping across the stones. A single shot rang out, and the beast collapsed. With a screech, its body twisting before falling still. She stared at him, her chest tight. He lowered the rifle calmly as if it had been nothing. "You're welcome," he said dryly. Her lips pressed together, her pride refusing to shape the words she owed him. She turned her head away, pretending she had not been impressed. Yet, deep inside, something shifted. His bravery was not arrogance. It was simply who he was. They moved on, but the tension between them grew heavier. Each time she faltered, he steadied her without a word. Each time she caught him watching her, she turned away quickly. They were two worlds forced to walk the same path, colliding at every step yet bound by survival. By midday, the heat weighed down on them. The soldier stopped at a broken fountain, its basin cracked but still holding a shallow pool of rainwater. He crouched down, refilled his flask, then offered it toward her without looking at her directly. She stared at it for a long time. Last night, she had told herself she only drank because she was weak. Now, as she took the flask again, she wondered if it was becoming something more dangerous. Habit. "You don't have to look so angry when you accept help," he said, his tone edged with faint humor. Her glare cut sharp, but he only smirked, drinking after her without hesitation. The casualness of the act unsettled her. Among her people, to share water was a sign of trust, even intimacy. Did he know what that meant, or was it just another thoughtless human action? She could not decide which answer troubled her more. Later that day, they came across a collapsed tower. The wreckage blocked their path, forcing them to climb carefully over the broken stone. She tried to keep her balance, but her wound pulled at her, her foot slipping against the sharp edge. For one terrible moment, she fell forward, but before she could strike the ground, his hand caught her arm. He pulled her upright with surprising strength, holding her steady until she found her footing. She yanked her arm free immediately, her voice rising with fury. "I told you never to touch me." He met her eyes calmly. "And if I hadn't, you'd be lying broken down there. You're welcome again." Her chest heaved with anger. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tear the words from his throat. But her gaze dropped for a brief second to the rubble below, and the truth silenced her. Slowly, she turned away, her jaw clenched tight. She hated him more in that moment, not for saving her, but for being right. When the sun dipped low, painting the ruins in red light, they stopped once more. The soldier built another small fire while she sat a distance away, staring at the darkening horizon. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence stretched between them like a wall, but beneath it, something unspoken grew. She thought of her people, the betrayal that had left her alone. She thought of his steady presence, his quiet strength, and for the first time she wondered if survival had brought them together by chance or by something far greater. He sat across the fire, his eyes steady on the flames. He did not look at her, but she knew he was aware of her every movement. She hated that awareness, she feared it, but more than anything, she could not deny it gave her comfort in the shadows of a ruined world. The night was colder than the ones before, and the fire they built seemed too small against the vast ruins around them. The soldier leaned back against a broken wall, his weapon balanced across his knees. The noblewoman sat close enough to the fire for warmth, but far enough to remind him of the distance she wished to keep. The flames painted her face with shadows, and though she tried to hide it, there was a heaviness in her eyes. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant calls of scavengers. For a long time, she said nothing. Her pride always built walls around her words, but the weight of memory pressed hard tonight. She finally spoke, her voice low, not sharp like before, but heavy with something he hadn't heard from her yet. "I was not supposed to be here." The soldier lifted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't speak, waiting instead for her to continue. She stared into the flames. This city was meant to honor me. My name carries weight among my people. I was to stand in the center of it, strong, untouchable, a symbol of what we are. Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. But someone close to me, someone I trusted, lured me here with lies, promises of victory. Instead, I found ruin and betrayal. Her voice trembled slightly and she despised the weakness of it. She pressed her lips together, forcing her face into a mask, but her eyes betrayed her. The soldier studied her carefully. He had suspected she carried a story deeper than her armor and pride, but hearing it from her own mouth made it real. "You were betrayed by your own," he said quietly. She snapped her head toward him, eyes burning. "Do not twist my words. My people are not like yours. Betrayal is not our way. Yet here you are," he answered calmly. The truth stung sharper than any blade. She turned away, her jaw tight. She hated that he could reduce her, pain to a simple truth. She hated even more that she had told him at all. For a while they sat in silence again. The soldier reached into his pack and tossed a small piece of dried ration toward her. She caught it instinctively, glaring at him as though the simple act was an insult. "I did not ask for this." "You didn't have to," he said. "You're hungry." Her pride urged her to throw it into the fire, but her body betrayed her again. After a long pause, she ate, each bite hard and tasteless but necessary. She hated that he was right, hated that he kept being right. As the night dragged on, the wind whistled through the ruins. She pulled her damaged cloak tighter around her shoulders, her eyes drifting back to him. He was watching the fire, his face steady, though the scars and dirt made him look worn. She studied him quietly, wondering how a human could seem so calm in a place filled with death. Her people had always said humans were fragile, quick to break. Yet this one looked unshakable, as if the ruins around them were nothing more than another challenge to endure. "You carry yourself as though this war means little to you," she said suddenly. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "War means everything and nothing. It destroys cities, kills friends, takes years we'll never get back. But in the end, it always comes down to two people like this, sitting across from each other, trying to figure out if they'll survive the night." His words hit her harder than she expected. She stared at him, unsure of how to reply. No one among her people would ever speak of war in such simple, brutal honesty. It was always wrapped in glory and honor and pride. But here was a human, stripping it bare with words she could not deny. Her chest tightened as she looked away, her thoughts pulling her back to the betrayal. She remembered the face of the one who had led her here, the false smile, the false promises. She had trusted, and in trusting she had fallen. That failure burned more than her wound. It cut deeper than the ruins around her. The soldier shifted slightly, resting his rifle against the wall. "If you want revenge," he said quietly, "you'll need strength to get there, and you don't have that if you starve or collapse." Her head turned sharply toward him. "Do not speak to me as though you understand my path." "I don't," he admitted, "but I understand the feeling of being betrayed." His voice softened, though it carried the weight of memory. "It leaves you with a choice. You can let it destroy you, or you can survive long enough to make it matter." She stared at him, her anger fading into silence. For the first time, she saw not just a soldier, but someone who carried his own scars. She wanted to ask what betrayal he had faced, but the words caught in her throat. Her pride would not let her ask. The fire burned lower, the shadows stretching longer. She pulled her knees close, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. Before her eyes closed, she whispered, more to herself than to him, "I will survive. I must." His gaze softened as he adjusted the fire. "Then survive. That's all that matters right now." Her eyes closed, though her heart remained restless. For the first time since the betrayal, she allowed herself to sleep near another living being, even if it was a human. The weight of her pride still pressed on her, but beneath it, a fragile thread of something new was beginning to form. A connection she did not want, yet could not ignore. The soldier stayed awake longer, his eyes scanning the ruins, listening to the wind. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. Enemy patrols, more beasts, or worse. But tonight he had heard the truth from her lips, and that truth changed everything. She was not just an enemy noblewoman. She was someone broken by betrayal, and that made her far more human than she would ever admit. The dawn broke quietly, though the city was never truly still. Smoke still clung to the air, drifting through shattered streets. The soldier was the first to rise, shaking the stiffness from his arms, his eyes sweeping across the ruins with the caution of someone who had lived too many mornings like this. The noblewoman stirred soon after, her face pale, her movements careful as her wound tugged at her strength. She straightened quickly, forcing herself to stand tall, unwilling to let him see the weakness in her. They moved on in silence, their footsteps echoing in the hollow streets. The soldier kept his rifle close, his gaze sharp, but his ears caught, more than the sound of crumbling stone, voices, distant, faint, carried by the wind. He raised his hand suddenly, signaling for her to stop. She froze, her eyes narrowing. "What is it?" she whispered. "Patrol," he said quietly. "Not beasts this time. Soldiers." Her chest tightened. She knew immediately whose soldiers they were. Not humans, her own people, the ones who had left her to die. She felt the sharp sting of shame burn her pride, though she forced her face into cold calm. The soldier crouched low behind a wall, pulling her down beside him. She resisted the motion for a moment, then followed reluctantly. Together they peered over the edge of broken stone. Across the street, shadows moved, an armed patrol of her people, scanning the ruins for survivors. Their weapons glimmered faintly in the light, and their voices carried with sharp authority. "They're looking for you," the soldier said softly. Her throat tightened. "No. They're looking to finish what they started." He glanced at her, reading the weight in her words. "Betrayal." She did not answer, her jaw locking tight. The patrol moved slowly, methodically. If they continued, they would cross directly into the street where she and the human hid. The soldier's mind raced. They could run, but the noise would draw attention. They could fight, but the odds were poor. He looked at her, her noble eyes burning with anger and shame. For all her pride, she knew the truth. Alone, she could not face them. He whispered, "You want to confront them. I can see it in your face, but if you rush into this now, you'll die." Her hands curled into fists. "They took everything from me. My honor, my power, my place among my people. To leave them standing is to let that betrayal live." His voice was steady, almost cold. "And to fight them now is to throw your life away. Then they win twice." She glared at him, torn between fury and reason. He was right, again. She hated that truth. She hated him for saying it. But she hated herself more for knowing it was the only choice. The patrol drew closer, their boots heavy on the stone. The soldier reached out, his hand brushing her arm to pull her lower against the wall. Her eyes blazed at his touch, her voice sharp in a whisper. "Don't you dare touch me, human." He ignored her anger. "Stay down, trust me." The words cut deep. Trust. A word she had buried under layers of pride. Yet as the patrol passed, their shadows sliding across the rubble, she stayed still. His hand pressed lightly against her arm, holding her steady enough that even her trembling anger could not shake her. The soldiers moved on, their voices fading into the distance. The ruins fell silent again. The human finally released her, stepping back as though nothing had happened. She sat there, her heart pounding, the taste of bitterness thick on her tongue. "You saved me," she whispered harshly, her pride choking the words. He shook his head. "I didn't save you. I just kept you alive long enough to make your choice later." She turned her face away, fury rising again, though not toward him. Toward herself. Toward the world. Toward the betrayal that had left her here. They waited until the patrol's presence was far behind them before moving again. The soldier led the way through twisting alleys, keeping low, every sense alert. She followed silently, her thoughts, a storm inside her mind. When they finally stopped to rest, the sun was dipping low. They found shelter beneath the collapsed remains of a great hall, its roof shattered, its walls leaning like broken teeth. The soldier dropped his pack, scanning the shadows carefully before lowering himself against the stone. She sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees. After a long silence, she spoke. "You risked your life for me." He met her eyes steadily. "I've been risking it since the day this war started. You're just another reason." Her chest tightened. She wanted to deny his words, to twist them into arrogance, but the calm in his voice held no boast. "Only truth. Do not think this changes anything between us," she said finally, her voice sharp, though weaker than before. He gave a faint smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." The fire they built that night was small, almost hidden from the world. She sat close enough to the warmth, but not close enough to him. Yet as the night grew darker, the memory of his hand pulling her down replayed in her mind. She hated the thought. She hated that she had not pulled away. And most of all, she hated the small, fragile truth she could no longer deny. She was beginning to need him, and that terrified her more than the betrayal, more than the patrol, more than the endless ruins stretching all around them. The night passed without sleep. The noblewoman lay still, her body weary but her mind sharp with restless thoughts. The memory of the patrol haunted her, the faces of those who should have protected her, but instead sought her ruin. She replayed the moment the human's hand had pulled her down, steady and certain. Her pride screamed against it, yet deep inside she knew that without him, she would already be lying broken among the stones. When dawn broke, the soldier rose first, as always. His movements were careful, practiced, as if every step was part of a pattern carved by years of survival. She watched him in silence, noting how his eyes scanned the horizon, how he never allowed himself to relax fully. His kind had always been described as careless and impulsive, but nothing about him fit that picture. They moved again through the ruins, the sun cutting sharp beams through collapsed walls and broken towers. Each step was harder than the last. For her, the wound at her side bleeding again under the strain. She clenched her teeth, refusing to slow, but he noticed anyway. He always noticed. By midday, the danger came without warning. They crossed a wide-open street where the wind howled between the walls, carrying dust and ash. From above, a shadow dropped suddenly. An enemy drone, damaged but still lethal. Its weapon flared, spraying shards of energy across the stones. The noblewoman froze, too slow to react. The blast struck close, the shockwave sending her stumbling backward. Before she could fall, the soldier moved. He shoved her aside and stood firm in front of her, his body catching the edge of the strike. Pain seared across his arm, but he did not falter. He lifted his rifle and fired back, each shot steady and precise. The drone wavered, sparks spitting from its broken frame, before crashing down into the dust with a hiss of dying power. The silence after the fight was heavy. Smoke rose from the wreckage, and the soldier lowered his weapon slowly. His arm was burned, his uniform torn, but his stance remained solid. He turned back to her, his expression calm despite the pain. "You all right?" She stared at him, her throat tight, her words caught between pride and something deeper. She wanted to shout at him, to remind him that she had told him never to touch her, never to interfere. But the truth pressed too heavy. He had taken the wound meant for her. He had stood between her and death. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Why would you do that?" He shrugged slightly, his face steady. "Because you're alive, that's reason enough." Her heart pounded, her anger burning with confusion. No one among her people would risk themselves for her like that. Not anymore. Not after betrayal had stripped her power. Yet here was a human, the enemy, taking her pain without question. It made no sense. It broke every rule she had ever known. She stepped closer without realizing, her hand reaching out before her mind could stop it. Her fingers brushed lightly against his shoulder, trembling as they touched the edge of his burn. The heat of his wound pulsed under her palm, And for the first time since the war began, she felt the weight of connection instead of hatred. Her voice was softer now, breaking. "I do not understand you." He gave her a faint, tired smile. "You don't have to." Her chest tightened as she pulled her hand back quickly, ashamed of her own weakness. She turned away, staring hard at the ruins, as if they could hide the truth unraveling inside her. But the image of him, standing in front of her taking the strike, would not leave her. They rested in the shadow of a fallen tower. He tied cloth around his wound, his hands steady despite the pain. She sat near him, her pride crumbling piece by piece. Silence wrapped around them, but it was no longer the sharp silence of enemies. It was something fragile, uncertain, yet warmer than the fire they built each night. When darkness fell, she sat closer to him than before. Not beside him, not close enough for touch, but nearer than she had ever dared. The flames lit his face, and she studied him quietly. He had saved her more than once, yet he never asked for thanks, never demanded loyalty. That was what confused her most. Among her people, every act carried a weight, a price. Yet his actions seemed to come without calculation. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You risked your life for mine. You could have left me. You should have left me." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Maybe. But I didn't." Her eyes held his for a long moment before she turned away, her heart pounding. She hated the feelings twisting inside her. Gratitude, confusion, fear, and something else she dared not name. As the night deepened, she lay down near the fire. Sleep came slowly, her mind filled with images of betrayal and battle, but woven into those memories was a new image, a human standing between her and death, unshaken, unyielding. It unsettled her more than any enemy. The soldier remained awake, his rifle across his knees, watching the shadows. He felt the burn in his arm, the ache in his bones, but he did not regret his choice. Somewhere deep inside, he knew she would never see him the way she saw her own kind. Yet that did not matter. What mattered was that for now, she was alive. And, though she would never admit it, a part of her had already begun to trust him. The ruins were quiet, but it was the kind of silence that warned of danger. The soldier moved carefully through the broken streets, his rifle ready, while the noblewoman followed close behind. She was tired, her wound still aching, yet her steps were stronger than before. Something inside her had shifted after the drone attack. She still carried her pride like armor, but she no longer denied the truth. Without the human beside her, she would not have made it this far. The sun was low, painting the shattered towers in shades of fire and shadow. The soldier stopped suddenly, raising a hand for her to stay back. She bristled at the command but obeyed, her sharp eyes scanning the path ahead. Voices drifted through the wind again, not faint this time but close, moving with purpose. Another patrol. This time, she did not need him to explain. She recognized the formation, the armor, the stride of soldiers trained under the same banners she once commanded. Her heart twisted with fury. These were her people, yet not her allies. They were the ones who had betrayed her, who wanted her gone. Her eyes burned as she whispered, "It is them." The soldier glanced at her, his expression calm, steady. "Then we move carefully." But the patrol was already too close. A shout rang out and suddenly energy fire cut through the air. The soldier shoved her down behind a wall as blasts struck the stone, sending sparks into the dust. He returned fire quickly, each shot precise, forcing the patrol to scatter for cover. The air filled with smoke and screams. The noblewoman pressed against the wall, her heart racing. Her pride told her to rise, to face them head-on, to show them she was not broken. But her broken weapon was useless, and her body was still weak. For the first time, she felt true fear, not of death, but of being helpless again. She looked at the human, his stance firm, his aim unshaken even as fire rained around them. He shouted over the chaos, "If you want to live, fight with me." Her chest tightened. He had saved her again and again, but now he asked something different. Not for her silence, not for her acceptance, but for her strength. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to rise. She grabbed a shard of broken metal from the ground, holding it like a blade. Crude, desperate, but better than nothing. When the patrol tried to flank them, she moved with sudden force, striking one soldier down with the shard before stealing his weapon. The sight of her, wounded but fierce, shocked her enemies. For a moment they hesitated, and the human used that moment to press the attack. Side by side, they fought through the ruins. His shots tore through the patrol with precision, while her fury burned hotter than her pain. She moved with grace born of desperation, her voice cutting through the clash as she shouted commands, instincts of leadership returning despite her fall from power. The soldier listened without question, following her orders as if they had fought together for years. The battle stretched long, until the last of the patrol broke and fled into the shadows. The ruins grew silent again, save for the crackle of fire and the sound of their heavy breathing. The noblewoman stood trembling, her weapon slipping from her hand. Her chest heaved, her wound burning, but her eyes shone with something new. She turned to the human, who lowered his rifle slowly, his body marked with dirt and blood but still steady. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the wreckage. She wanted to speak, to shape the words her pride had buried for so long. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Finally, she whispered, so soft she almost hated herself for it. You have changed me." The soldier tilted his head, his eyes, calm but curious. "How so?" She looked away, her voice rough. "I do not trust easily. I do not bend. But you have stood when others fled. You have bled when others betrayed. I cannot call you friend. Not yet. But I cannot call you enemy either." Her words were heavy, almost painful, but they were true. The soldier gave a faint smile, his face unreadable in the fading light. "That's enough for me." The fire of sunset burned brighter across the ruins, casting them in red and gold. The noblewoman stood taller, though her body still ached. For the first time since her betrayal, she no longer felt completely alone. They gathered what little they had and moved on, their path uncertain, their future clouded by war. But something had shifted forever between them. The human had broken. Through her walls, not with power, not with force, but with simple courage and stubbornness. As night fell again, she walked beside him, not behind, not apart, but closer than before. She still held her pride, still carried her anger, but now she carried something else too. A fragile bond she could not name, one born in fire and betrayal, but alive all the same. She glanced at him once, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Do not think this means I belong to you." He chuckled softly, his eyes forward. "Wouldn't dream of it." But the faint smile that touched her lips betrayed the truth she could not yet admit.